So I'll go ahead and start first. And we are so lucky today to have our faculty member, Anna McIntosh, who is currently in Scotland, and myself, Dr. Susan Swem, Executive Director of Now I See a Person Institute, and Los Angeles, and a very amazing person who is not only, coming into this field, but she had some very amazing thoughts on how the type of virtual learning that we've created over the last 6 months might help practitioners and clients. So thank you all for being here today. And one of the things that we were talking about before you came on, Emma, was how do people get well, and how do they help the therapist or the psychologist or the psychiatrist help them transcend whatever symptoms they had that made them feel quote unquote unwell. So I don't know if you wanted to pick it up from here, our wonderful guest.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. So I think that maybe we should shift our focus. Instead of focusing on the symptoms, we should focus on different solutions, like behavioral habit solutions. Instead of being oh, you're anxious and you just need that, shifting it towards okay, what can we do with this energy, and how can we work with this emotion in a positive manner, instead of trying to suppress it with medication, or by focusing on the negative aspect of it. Perhaps if someone's if I'm feeling stressed, because stress is a normal thing in existence, I like to work out, or I like to, do a tedious task that is repetitive. So painting is really great for me, or even organization of my office space, and that way I feel more clear in the head. And yeah, just focusing more on solution-based outcomes instead of a diagnosis, and feeling like we're trapped in because with the diagnosis, I often it's people feel trapped. They feel like this is my doom, this is my cycle, this is just what I do. But we don't want people to feel trapped in these negative emotions. We want them to learn that they will pass, and that it's just a matter of transmuting them and letting them go. And yeah.
So Emma, what were your thoughts on that? Because I had a lot of thoughts that I kind of already talked about off camera, that I thought they were very profound.
Yeah, very profound. I've heard it a lot, just how people feel trapped with the diagnosis, and that they just feel like nobody is seeing them for who they are, with their own solutions, like our wonderful guest just talked about. Because certainly people that I've worked alongside have, when they've been given a diagnosis, say that they maybe can't do things because of the diagnosis, or that they forget who they were and who they are, and they just see this diagnosis, and people around them see the diagnosis, and then aren't able to see them as a person, because they're just focusing on this diagnosis. And then we fail to see people as people with their own solutions, their own resources, to overcome suffering. Yeah, and that's something that has just resonated with me listening to you talk today. Yeah.
So one of the things is that I think that both you and I, Emma, have found, for many years, there's many people that talk about this, but being led by the client on what kind of change they want to occur.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, when you just see it through the lens of a diagnosis, then there's a one size fits all fix.
Yeah.
Right. So, and our wonderful guest who is entering into this field that we are, knows about that. I think both from experiencing it as a younger person and then learning these types of things in school.
Mm-hmm.
That someone gets a diagnosis of, let's just say, bipolar disorder, and then they talk about the bipolar symptoms, and then they talk about how to get those symptoms to go away. And there's so much that is unknown about this person, like this wonderful person was talking about, that they have maybe already in place their own self solutions.
Mm-hmm.
That for whatever reasons were not working at that point in time. But those types of things, those pragmatic things, kind of get lost in favor that someone has a disease that will follow them the rest of their life. And kind of in having a disease, there's this inherent message that those solutions won't even work anymore because they're not that person anymore. That once they get that diagnosis, their self-identity changes. And I'm wondering, because I know that we talked about this off camera, I was wondering if our wonderful guest could maybe follow behind me and give your impressions on what I just talked about.
Hello. Yeah, so I do also like, excuse me, my throat needed to be cleared. As like when people are given a quote unquote like diagnosis or death sentence or some kind of fixed regimen of like, you're told that you are something, you're gonna believe it and you're gonna not have hope. And I think that having hope that you can get better is the whole point of our like this practice. It's
Mm-hmm.
to inspire that we can get better and that bad things happen and it's normal and it's a part of human existence, but you don't need to identify with it.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't need to become these horrible thoughts or
Mm-hmm.
these horrible circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot that can be said about that, but I think the baseline is like we just want to bring hope to people. We want them to know, you can get better. You are someone who is capable of joy. You are someone who is capable of being relaxed. And, in American culture, the diagnoses are through the roof for depression and anxiety. And once someone does get that diagnosis, it doesn't go away. Like on their chart, I mean, like the doctors don't, like they're always going to ask you, hey, how's your depression? Or how's your anxiety levels? It's not seen as normal, even though so many people have these diagnoses. It's not seen as something that's treatable or normal. It's seen as a quote unquote death sentence. So, I guess like my mission, and I guess all of our missions as, people that work in the mental health field, is to help people feel better. And I think that we can do that by just inspiring hope within them and saying, you know what? Yes, right now it's hard. Yes, right now it's really difficult to be a person. You're going through a lot. You just experienced something horrible, but the whole world isn't horrible. And you can feel joy again, and you can feel, you know, like relaxed, or even like there are beautiful moments within life that make the bad ones worth it.
And as a consumer, when someone asked you, because I'm just kind of putting myself in your shoes, as a consumer, when someone asked you, are you depressed or are you anxious? How, and let's just say that you weren't necessarily so, or maybe you were, I don't know. How was that for you to be asked those questions?
Well, I feel like being asked repeatedly, how's your anxiety, or how's your depression, or how's this mental illness, it, it's it feels like it doesn't go away. It feels like it's I'm a very metaphorical person. So I like to say that it feels like a poltergeist almost that's within you, or like some kind of demon that's like trapped inside of you, and they're just constantly addressing, this ghost within you.
Like,
as a,
or like a cancer, right? Like a
yeah, like a cancer. Because like that even ties in really well with what I was saying earlier. Like it feels like a death sentence, because you're like it's this like feeling of impending doom, which makes the side effects of this emotional state worse, because you allow yourself to fall into like these bad habits. So if someone is like, oh, I'm really sad and depressed because I'm getting bullied at school, and the doctor says, well, someone who has depression, a condition, is it's normal to not get out of bed all day, then the person is just not going to even try to get out of bed, and not even going to try to go, because they can then pin that on the diagnosis, or they can then pin that on like the doctor and be like, well, the doctor told me that it was basically impossible to try. Like, I know that doctors are not, like, when they're saying these things, their intention is not to perpetuate this like cycle of like staying in these negative emotions, but this is kind of what happens is people will then see like, oh, I'm messed up, that's fine. Like, I think that when we reach out for help, that we really want someone to tell us it's going to get better and it's okay. And when someone receives a diagnosis, it's kind of doing the opposite, like unintentionally, of course. I like people don't go into this field with bad intentions. It's totally unintentional, but people will then be like, okay, if I'm just depressed, like my only, in American culture, it's like my only hope is to find a medication that works with my brain balance, instead of, thinking about it like, okay, like what can I do to inspire more joy in my life? And so I recently got back from Europe, and I spent a good amount of time there. I spent about a year there, and I really tried to study how, people live very differently out there, and how people don't have these same diagnoses of depression and anxiety, and like there's not as huge of a mental health epidemic out there. So I asked myself very constantly, why are people happier here versus somewhere else? Like, is it something in the water? Is it something in the land? Like, what's going on? And I really found that, like, instead of someone going to the doctor and being like, I'm sad, they would go into their community and get emotional support, and or they would go into their their habits and things that like brought them joy, and they didn't identify with these things of depression, even though they still experienced all of these same emotions that we're feeling here in America. They just addressed it differently. They didn't take pills to suppress it. They were like, okay, I'm sad right now, so I'm gonna paint. Like, especially going to an Italian academy with a bunch of other artists, like they really channeled their pains and their frustrations into their art, and then they were free. They their whole life, like they could feel their joy because they were like, well, you know, everybody has negative feelings. It's just a matter of what you do with it. They weren't stuck by this diagnosis of feeling like, oh, this is an impending doom that I have, or my poltergeist, or whatever.
Or my cancer.
Yeah, it's not their cancer.
And so, pardon me, we were also talking about that. What some of the things that you also saw differently was within that sense of community that people had. You had talked about that people had hobbies, and I had talked about that they had things that gave them a sense of self, that they had multiple self identities. It wasn't just like I'm a student or I'm an artist, but they had a lot of things that were bringing them joy, and they had a lot of people to celebrate that joy with them, so that when trauma came, it didn't it didn't create what you were just talking about earlier.
Yeah, they totally do. They have from my experience of the people I've interacted with, they were very well-rounded people. Like they had some kind of sports they were into, some kind of craft. Everyone was like really in love with cooking. It's Italian culture, so they loved their food, and for them it was like a huge communal gathering, which was such a beautiful experience to like witness and become a part of. And you know, they cared very deeply for their people, and like it was just everyone had so many different hobbies. And so if one thing didn't work out, which you know in life it does, or if one thing hit like a stall, it wasn't like this feeling of impending doom of like, oh my gosh, the thing that I identify with is not going well, therefore I have no value outside of this. They gave themselves value through, like, I don't want to say value, I want to say more, they built their self-confidence and their skill levels with so many different things that their confidence was in a sense almost indestructible. Because if I have built my entire identity around painting and I get a bad mark from a painting professor, that's going to hurt a lot more than if painting is just a hobby of mine and I'm just trying to get better at it. That makes any sense. But it also, like, also having so many hobbies, it keeps the mind very, very occupied. So we don't have this necessary, like this chance of, you know, just cycling through these horrible memories, or even like cycling through of like what's going wrong in the world. It gives them something to have joy and to wake up every day and do. And like, you know, they can see their literal impact on the world around them, because every day they're, or like once a week or every day or however often, whatever habit they're doing, they see the impact that they're making in that realm.
And so, you know, the type of work that we do, that we've called it collaborative language systems approach therapy and collaborative dialogical practices and community engagement collaborative recovery model, but it's a collective work where we work, we try to work with communities, a person's community. Our community works with the person's community to create change in the way that that person sees fit to create change, because we don't feel that people are broken, and that we do feel that they have the self-agency to be able to create their own success. And one of the things that you had talked about previously also was being, you know, as a child or a teenager hospitalized, that your community becomes the diagnosis. Is that correct?
That is very true, yes, because within like we were also discussing how like there's like this whole culture around hospitalizations because of like, you know, it's kind of this idea of like, oh, the outcasts or the doomed or the damned are all thrown in one place, and therefore creating like a different social environment of people who identify with being damned, and perpetuating this cycle of like, oh, we're all screwed, so how screwed can you get? But what the doctors really like, I mean, maybe not just the doctors, but also like the different counselors, or even like what the whole premise of the discussion is really led on: how are you a victim of your environment, as opposed to how can you be empowered by your environment. So when you ask someone, how are you a victim of it, then automatically that points blame on their community and their family, and it's, oh, what are they doing wrong? Like, oh, my mom was mean to me. And it's like, yes, these things do hurt, and it's difficult, like people do get hurt by their environments, and you know, I don't want to discredit anyone who has like gone through any kind of like serious abuse, or you know, or just like any emotion. We don't want to discredit that, but we as humans, like we're working with other humans, right? Humans are not perfect, and the thing is, it's like most environments, people are just trying to do their best and to bring love into a situation, and they were also hurt by the world, and so they think that, you know, this behavior is normal, and obviously boundaries are extremely important, and I'm not saying that, you know, you should or shouldn't talk to someone or any of that. That's all up to the individual and, you know, their relationships. But you know, most of the time people just want to help other people, and they're just doing their best. And when we're in hospitals, we're taught to villainize other people, and then we're given this like, they're given this diagnosis, or even just like this like doom cycle of like, everyone's trying to hurt you, everyone's trying to kill you, and it's just you and your mind, and the best way to do like heal is to completely isolate yourself. But that's not true. We need other people to survive. And when we look at someone who may have hurt us and we say, hey, like, was this your intention? Often it's going to be a no. Often it's super unintentional. And I've even found that like with my own mother, like sometimes she said things that hurt my feelings. And instead of like, in the past when I was young, I used to just hold on to that and be like, my mom just secretly hates me and she wants me dead, and oh, blah 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 blah. And then as I aged, learned like I learned to really start opening these doors of conversation and be like, hey mom, this really hurt my feelings. Why did you do that? Or this really hurt my feelings, period. And usually she'll come and say, I'm so sorry, that was not my intention. I didn't know that would hurt you. I didn't mean to communicate it in that way. Or even she'll be like, what? Like, my mother used to talk to me 10 times worse and blah, blah, blah. So for her to, it's normal. But like, regardless, is our community because they love us. Yes. Right? And they care for us. And often the people that love us the most, they will hurt us unintentionally.
Yes.
And when we come in with this idea of like understanding and like, okay, like I know you're a person and you're probably just stressed because you worked a lot and blah blah blah, but my heart still hurts. They like, maybe like a conversation will heal that wound that happened. And I'm not saying this is like a blanket, like, oh, this is going to work for everything and everyone.
Mhm.
And, some people, like, no one's perfect, but that's the case that I've personally experienced, is that, like, the people that hospitalizations have kind of, or even like, this like impending doom of behave like being diagnosed with something like depression, and like villainizing, like how the doctors are like, oh, this is what's wrong with your life, you just need to run away. I found that, like, running away makes it worse, because we need love in our life, right? So if we go to the people that are trying to give us love and just learn to communicate the same love language,
Mhm.
then we're all a lot happier.
Mhm. It reminded me that when I was a young therapist, that they did do that. And I think I talked about this in another podcast, that people were told to write letters to their parents of cutting them off. Like, so that was part of the therapeutic treatment, was to cut your family off. And it didn't work out so well. People, after they were finished being angry at their parents, they wanted their parents back. And and you know, it was rather difficult. But one of the things in you talking, and Emma, you might feel the same way, and I'm going to get your ideas in just a second. But in one of the ways that you're talking is that there's no easy recipe, that that and I think that's what all of these virtual um, opportunities on clients teaching therapists, is that there's no one way of doing things. There's no um, and that people want support. They don't necessarily want um, a recipe for wellness. They want to know that they're okay, and that they have the strength to manage things. Is that what you were hearing similar, Emma, or what kind of things were you hearing?
Yeah, I was hearing that in terms of like, um, our wonderful guest was describing just having conversations that empower people, like empowerment rather than um deficit conversations, like making people feel less than. Um, and I think that's what we try to do. We try to create that conversational space for people where people feel that they can share um, their suffering and their difficulties that are going on for them. And when people have space to do that, they kind of feel empowered, they feel heard, they feel validated, even though there's maybe no solution to the hurt, but they've been heard, and they've there's this new dynamic that happens where people feel supported and maybe connected more, and there's like this level of understanding each other a bit more when people are given that space, even though it's really hard space sometimes for those conversations to happen. I think it brings that real strength, and it brings that real empowerment, those empowerment conversations, where people just feel finally heard. I think that's certainly something that I'm hearing and I've heard before.
Mhm. Mhm. And I think, you know, this is something I've said before, and, our wonderful guest is going to be, a licensed clinician at some point in time. And she has so much wisdom, because she also was a consumer at one point in time when she was young. And, you know, I, there are so many, I don't know how, like, it would probably be something to at least be aware of how many different kind of therapies there are now in the world, because there are a lot of different
A
types of
lot.
therapies.
Overwhelming.
Yes, and they're all, it seems like these days to be that there's something individually wrong with that person, that for some reason, you know, due to genetics or something, that they have, like our wonderful guest was talking about, some type of not non-regulation in their brain or something like that. But you know, I think this conversation of looking at things systemically, no one, even no one's an island. No, we have people that are influencing us in positive ways. We have people influencing us in ways that aren't so positive, that we would want to be more positive. So having this inclusiveness of all these voices is just this rich chorus of new solutions to arise.
Mm-hmm.
And not a therapist solution, but a solution of, you know, I hate to use the word consumer, but of the folks that just are suffering and they want so much for life to be different.
Yeah.
So our wonderful guest, is there anything else that you would want to say to invite people to be able to have a chance to learn from the voices of the people who have suffered and who are no longer suffering in the ways they were?
I think just opening like your heart. I would like to say, like, you know, just open yourself up to like the idea that everyone can try to come from a space of love and understanding, and really just trying to work with what you have, as opposed to destroying everything and isolating yourself and thinking that you need to build a whole new. Obviously, you know, this is a case by case thing, and sometimes we find family within friends and kinds of things, or even like online communities, people find love in that. But just trying to breathe love into, you know, the connections and the communications, and also learning how to breathe love into yourself by making yourself feel empowered. And like, a diagnosis should not be a death sentence. This is a temporary situational kind of thing. Like, you know, going back to the what I was saying earlier, you know, if you're getting bullied in school, you're not going to feel good. Period. It doesn't matter who you are or what you come from or any of that. If you are made to, like, if things in your life are going bad, they're going to feel bad. And that's just the human condition. We cannot avoid the pain and the trauma, but we can learn how to cope with it. We can reach into our communities, and we can let it go. We don't need to identify with it. We don't need to live with it. It doesn't need to be the cancer or the ghosts in our body. It's just a part of life, and for every bad moment there's going to be a good one. And I would just like to inspire hope and say, you know, for everyone listening, whatever end of the cycle they're on, just in every way that they can, just try to inspire hope, because things will get better. And when you're in that really dark space, it doesn't feel like it, but we just need other people to remind us, like, there are good moments and there will be good moments again. And we just need to work with that.
And so also the people that will be seeing this are clinicians. So clinicians or professors or perhaps other people that have institutes and are trying to help people in the best ways that they can. If you had some final thoughts for them as well, what would those be? As because we really do believe that it's the client that instructs the clinician and how to help with those things. So what might be some final thoughts on that as well?
Some final thoughts, I guess, would be around like really just listening to the person that you're working with, because you're not working with a diagnosis, you're working with a person who's having symptoms of difficult things in their life, and really trying to tailor their healing, or maybe, hang on, tailor your care in a way that is healing to them as an individual. Because I know for I've reached the most help when I've been actually listened to as a person and not as a list of symptoms or a diagnosis. So, reminding ourselves that, like, you know, everyone feels pain. I'm sure every clinician out there, like, has at some point felt really, really low. These people that are coming to clinicians they're coming for help because they just don't know how to pull themselves out of that hole. So just remember that, you know, like you were able to let go of whatever negative things that have happened to you, this person can too. And it doesn't matter how deep in this like spiral of despair that they can come out of it. They just need a little bit of help, and they need care. And it's a whole journey, and it's a long journey of self-discovery and learning what makes them feel empowered, and but really just supporting them and listening to them and encouraging the good habits that they themselves are starting on their own. Like, no one told me when I was sad to pick up a paintbrush. I did that on my own, but I did need encouragement in saying, you can paint, you can do this, there are other things. So just remember that you're a supporting role for these people and their healing journey, and just keep the hope alive. They're not going to live in this despair forever. At least that's the whole point of this practice, is to not let people live in despair forever.
Oh, wow. I think that's the title to this podcast. What do you think, Emma?
I love it. Yeah. I mean, hope is what keeps me going and keeps me working with people as well. And if we don't have hope, then what do we have? So keeping hope alive.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for spending this time with us. I enjoyed listening to everyone. And, this has really been my journey. When I was listening, I was looking off and I was thinking how sound this is, how it's not one of those measurable things though. It's hard to measure. How do you provide hope? When is hope enough? How is support? And I guess and thinking that the person that we're in conversation with will teach us that, right? We don't have to be fortune tellers or mind readers or have all the answers. And I think that's, especially for younger new therapists, I think that's something that's difficult, is to go into a session and think I don't have all the answers. And maybe that's sometimes why someone has so many books in their office, right? I remember when I first had my office, had all my books there. They were my security, right? And instead of myself.
Yeah.
So again, thank you guys all so much for taking this time. And we hope that this gives the opportunity to people who are going to be taking these classes a little bit about some of the things that they're going to be about. And it's not going to be a consensus of what helps every person, but it's going to be people that have had different challenges and suffering in their lives, helping others to understand what they need. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the space that you're creating for us to have this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you, wonderful person.
Thank you. Have a good day. Yeah. Ciao.
Ciao.